let's start this way. I want to ask kind of each of you this, but Roz, let's start with you. There is something happening here with these short-form, digestible seasons for sports. We're here talking about AU. They've done it with 3 sports. You are currently broadcasting Unrivaled. Yes, it's okay to talk about these other leagues. It's a rising tide lifts all boats situation. I mean, you could mention any number of these. TGL in golf, and they've just announced a women's TGL. I just was interviewing Paul Rabel of PLL. That's the Premier Lacrosse League. That's another example. They have launched a women's league. And I think what we're seeing is kind of a long regular season fatigue with the big leagues. And so maybe that's part of why there's a lot of hotness and excitement and dollars and eyeballs around these more digestible limited seasons where it's only 4 weeks, so every game matters.
Yes, I think some of these leagues, when I talk about women's basketball, like Unrivaled, like Athletes Unlimited, actually this is my 3rd time this season in Nashville for Athletes Unlimited, so covering all of these leagues. But to speak to your question about Unrivaled, it first was created to serve a need for the players. Like its original thought was, we'd like to have a place to play at home in the US to supplement incomes, to have a place where you could develop, work on your game. And also, it also happened during a time where there's a rising tide of attention on women's athletes and televising it and watching it and also buying into who they are as players and brands. And also, you know, Athletes Unlimited, I think, doesn't get enough credit for being in their 5th season. You know, Unrivaled's been doing it for 2 years. Athletes Unlimited was one of the first. So all of these leagues, I think, started first to serve a need for the players, but you also happen during this time where there's a very needy and hungry audience that wants more. And right now, one of the biggest ways I think these 2 leagues in particular are serving both the players and the fans and the ecosystem is that overall in women's basketball, at this very moment, there's a lot of ambiguity around this, obviously the CBA negotiations. Will there be a WNBA season? It also opens the door for a lot of negative, stereotypical kind of talk about where women's basketball is, why it's important, is it important, are people watching? And it's hard to know what's true. And for Unrivaled in particular, there was a really magical moment where they went to Philly, had a historic audience of 21,500, 490 fans, you know, sold out the arena, made $2 million in revenues and merch and sponsorships and ticket sales. And it was a really special moment that literally I was there calling it. I was on the broadcast. I was the sideline reporter. And I came there to call a game and do my job, but I literally had goosebumps during it. And the players were giggly and giddy in a way that like you don't always see. And the broadcasters felt that way. And Philly showed out. Every celebrity was there that was a Philly-born one. The fans were crazy. It was a really beautiful moment that gave us all some conviction during this time of not exactly knowing what's next. And so these leagues are doing a lot more than just creating alternative 4-week or 2-month slots. I think especially right now, they've proven very important.
Yeah, these leagues can do huge attendance numbers in an NBA stadium, for sure. Susie, you know, it's great to hear Roz say that Athletes Unlimited maybe doesn't get enough credit for having been around 5 years. I think sometimes ESPNW doesn't get enough credit. I mean, ESPNW has been here all along. Talk a little bit about how you guys have risen to this moment. You know, just last week you made news, and that is using what was the Sunday Night Baseball time slot for Women's Sports Sundays. Maybe that's a good entry point in here.
I'm gonna take this moment though. Like, how many of you have worked in women's sports for a very long time? Yeah, like we're here. This is what I'll say about Women's Sports Sundays. This has been a 20-year overnight success. Like, we've been in the business of supporting women's sports since the WNBA launched in 1999 is my year right. 68% of women's sports consumption comes by way of ESPN platforms. What we know is that the best viewership story in those windows was women's sports. The best revenue opportunity in those windows was women's sports. This was done very, very intentionally because the marketplace demands it and the fan demands it. What we are creating is a true standalone franchise franchise, this is our Monday Night Football. So this is in addition to everything else we're doing very intentionally, which is making women's sport more accessible, maximizing our rights, building around it, and serving the fan anytime, any place. Like, that is who we are. We are ESPN, and we do sports better than anybody else. And that includes women's sports. That's not putting it aside. It's treating it exactly how it should be. So we're really, really intentional. We're being very strategic about how we are growing these businesses and establishing an infrastructure that will make this more than a 9-week run. Obviously, we're doing so from the jump, but we were also really intentional with its name. We want this to be property agnostic, and we can pick it up and put it in other seasons. So we are using our best window for our best women's sports programming in a really unapologetic and intentional way.
Were you surprised by the response to the news of Women's Sports Sundays? You say unapologetic.
I will say, on me personally, no. I knew what we were doing. I knew how important it was to get this done and now build around it. We have a 60-plus person interdepartmental that we've had running since December. We're not launching this until June. And that's because we are establishing an infrastructure that will sustain this. So I will say, that, Barstool's doing segments on it, right? I forgot that guy's name. There's he's like a New York sports guy, and he did like a 3-minute segment on how ESPN died because we were putting women's sports and replacing Sunday Night Baseball. Like, bro, we've made it. Like, if these guys are this mad about it because it's serving our business, like, to me, that is like the best validation of what we've built and what we're building, where we're going.
Thank you. Yes, I want to talk about the haters at some point. Nancy, let's bring you into this. We've been talking about TV. You are a longtime TV executive, but when we talk about media and the business of the media of women's sports, it's also really on digital. And Togethxr has just built so much through being a digital-first brand, through using creators. I mean, can you talk about the approach that you guys have made to, as far as I can tell, announcing something almost every day? I mean, you announced like a new partnership yesterday, I saw. It's like we can't keep up. But what is the strategy there on digital?
Yeah, I mean, the exciting thing about this moment in women's sports is that, we live very upstream, and the fan doesn't just want the games, they want the behind the scenes, they want the athlete, they want the culture, they want the community. And so, we see it as part of our role is to facilitate that and to bring that to the table, and also to be a bit of an infrastructure for the incredibly rapidly growing branded content and brand activation universe that we're all living in. One of the challenges that brands have had has just been navigating an infrastructure that doesn't have a ton of infrastructure. And so us being able to be there and help those brands navigate that, be there for the fans, by way of culture, and going back to Unrivaled, we have a commerce relationship with Unrivaled. We obviously Angel Reese is one of our athlete partners. And so we're there and are surrounding and putting our arms around Unrivaled because the fan is there. And we want to be able to show the fan all of the incredible content around the games, not just the games. And so, commerce is a great example of how we do that with our community. There's a waiting list of over 7,000 now for the Unrivaled t-shirt, which is amazing. And so it's really putting our arms around a universe that's growing fast.
And just one thing to add on that, I think it's so important that we're raising the floor now. We're at this place where there is going to come a time when we're not breaking every single record, and that's okay. What we're doing is we are raising the floor, because if we do that, right, if we're getting let's call it a 1.6 number on Sunday night, and that becomes a 3.2 number, now we're not justifying our position, right? We're maximizing our revenue. We're generating more. We don't have to be apologetic for why we're putting something somewhere. So what Togethxr does with our community in serving them at an experiential level by way of merch and this kind of surround content, we truly are, I think, this phenomenal expression of throw us a ball and watch what we do with it, especially when it comes to women, because we really get to benefit from each other, as they continue to engage with the community at a really kind of ground floor level. We ultimately then need to serve them with our live broadcast and what we are creating in service of this growing audience.
I'm so glad you mentioned ratings. You're doing my job for me. But, when we talk about media, I wanted to ask each of you about kind of the pressure now, because with this boom that has happened, and again, Yes, it's not new. It's like you said, a 30-year overnight success. Yes, it's not new. Yes, it's been here, but there has been a boom. There has very clearly been a boom in the last maybe 2 or 3 years. And now there is a certain level of scrutiny that wasn't there before and pressure, right? And the easiest entry point for readers into the media side of things is the ratings. And it can often be very black and white, like the ratings went down. You say, oh God, the ratings went down. I mean, do you feel like there's either an unfairness there or this is just the new level we've attained, that everyone's going to write about the ratings and pick it apart?
Yeah, pressure's a privilege, and we sit in that. We're the institution. I believe as the institution, we have the most substantive responsibility to serve this fan, grow this audience, and do so with intention. Just like I said, like I truly believe the fact that we are, part of our strategy is mainstreaming women's sports across our established ecosystem. That means talking about women's sports more in our studio programming, including First Take, including Get Up, including our 6 p.m. Sports Center. That's done so very, very intentionally, because if we are talking about women's sports in those spaces, we are just deepening fandom. So for my perspective, maybe not everyone shares this, especially kind of people who are the diehard programmers. From my perspective, there's going to be fluctuations, there's going to be nuance, but for what it's worth, even for the front half of our women's college basketball season, when we are against football, we're up 39%. So, you know, I'm pretty okay with that.
Yeah, I'll jump in here from wearing the hat of a storyteller and a broadcaster in this. I don't feel any pressure. I am so excited. I'm so happy that there is an audience, or at least I already knew there was an audience, but that there's new eyes or more eyes, and that the announcements coming out at ESPN after every college game or every Final Four keep coming out. It keeps getting bigger. For me, what I'm seeing is there's a fan that's being challenged to know even more about these players, who are hungry to know, even about the middle ground of players. I think the pressure is on, as you throw it on some of those bigger platforms that don't always traditionally cover women's hoops. The pressure's on them to actually come correct, to actually prepare. Those are the stumbles I've seen from the broadcaster view of more attention on women's hoops, is that not everyone was ready to discuss elite female athletes properly. Or
What do you mean?
Right. Yeah. And look, I don't want to gatekeep either. You know, there's many ways to consume hoops. Many men's hoops are being consumed in a hater voice or talk down, or so as female sports, like I think there needs to be a loosening of sensitivity of who's in or how they do it. But as far as having the facts, being able to pronounce the names, like, saying Brianna Stewart is like
Not
saying Stephen Curry. It's Brianna Stewart. Like, it's Ann, Stewie, knowing that nickname, but you'd be surprised the discomfort in that, or being able, there were some crazy things that came out of your network, and some of the biggest platforms in sports, and men knowing the right language to even use to talk about role models, excellence, and certainly some not having the right preparation or facts. And that's disappointing. That's the pressure I see from a storyteller perspective, because there's pressure coming from people. Not only more people are watching, but more people are going to expect excellent coverage of these very exciting players and games.
And that coverage isn't necessarily coming from a linear environment. So I think there's a bit of generational here as well. When you're, the NWSL championship, we did a stud buds. So athletes crossing sports, which is incredibly successful for us, as well as Megan there. We did an Altcast. And parts of that were bigger than the broadcast. And so I think you can't just look at it as a binary, it's a rights environment, that's like a rights for ratings equation, versus the fan is in a much bigger, broader ecosystem occurring, and it's also that ecosystem is driving real revenue and real attention.
I'm just one more piggyback. I feel like Togethxr is in the streets. Like,
Serious?
yeah, no, for sure. Like, you are grassroots, like you're hit, and you've really nailed a few things. Even that everyone watches women's sports.
Everyone watches women's hockey.
Yay!
There's a few people with the
I feel like
t-shirt
there
on.
are people banding together. I want to shout out Sid and TP, like, players who transcended just the game. Obviously, stud buds, like them during All-Star was a boom and brought in all sorts of coverage and ways of thinking about not only hoops, but women. Like, we're at the forefront of defining what women feel like or look like or what powerful or what, can be on the cover of Vogue is. So, yeah, there's a lot of, I think women's sports in particular, like, shout out to all the digital platforms, to all the people covering, like, league fits, covering the walk-ins, the fashion. Of course women would kill that. So, yeah, the streets are important.
I mean, I've seen a couple people here today in the T-shirt. You see the T-shirt everywhere. I mean, that just cannot be overstated. Nancy, I'm glad you bring up Altcasts, though, because that is a great example where something that isn't the main broadcast can create a lot more social buzz, which in the end, arguably, is a bigger boon than even the traditional linear eyeballs. I mean, going back to your TV experience and A&E, I mean, what have you seen change in the industry writ large that has also kind of allowed for this moment to happen? I mean, we cover the rise of Altcast as just one example of many brand new things that have had a very quick impact.
If you look back at history, my grandparents had broadcast, I had cable, my kid has social. Some of it is a technology evolution, and every generation wanting their own form of media, their own form of storytelling. I think, fans want to be closer to the athlete and the culture and the community more today than ever before. And you can't just do that through the binary game. It's the game is exciting and drama, and it is the story of all stories that we get excited about. But everybody wants the contextual environment around that. And I think that's where things like Altcast or the T-shirt or the Stud Buds streaming, there's a much bigger universe there that, frankly, the men's sports didn't pick up on.
Well, one other thing, I've said this before, but I'll double down on it. What's magical about what you guys have created with Everyone Watches Women's Sports shirt is, so I'm a New York Giants fan. When I wear a Giants jersey, I know. When I wear a Giants jersey,
Patriots, so
yeah.
We should get.
I'm a Giants fan. If I wear an Everyone Watches Women's Sports shirt, you know about my identity. You know what I stand for.
Absolutely.
I am 10 toes down in supporting women and their accomplishment, and it means more than just being a fan of women's sports. And that's so inherently unique to this women's sports community. And I think that is now us, again, as the institution, what we are trying to serve. We see so much opportunity, and we talked about Altcasts. I view that as a true audience expansion vehicle. There are people who are just discovering their women's sports fandom, just discovering their sports fandom. How do we serve them? How do we, I use my wife perpetually as an example, not a sports fan, doesn't care. She came in, she's like, I love what you guys did with that slime Altcast. I was like, not us, babe, not us. But yeah, exactly. But I care deeply about serving that fan, and how are we getting her or him to understand that women's sports is for them. And that is really where we that's kind of our next space that we're going into, is how do we deepen that fandom? How do we grow that fandom? And how do we serve it with nuance, right? We have to serve the established fan that has had an incredibly high barrier to entry, who has had to work really hard for all of time. We see you, we are serving you, now you deserve this. Now, there's a ton of other fans who are like, women's sports seems lit. I'm into that. Okay, well,
Yeah.
Great. You can come with us too. We're not gatekeeping it. We want you to come with us, even if that requires a more substantive education.
That's exactly what I wanted to pick up on. I mean, Roz mentioned storytelling, and ESPNW has always talked about storytelling, and there's an extent to which you feel like you need to cater both to the expert fan, which is probably most of this room, the people who they know all the players already, they've been paying attention, and then also the newcomers who may not know that it's Brianna Stewart and may need to be reintroduced or introduced for the first time to these stars, and you think, how do they not know? I mean, there's a legion of women and men who may literally only have started paying attention with Caitlin Clark, and that rookie class and that year of the W. Do you guys feel a little bit like you're sort of always keeping them in mind and playing to both expert levels, especially?
I think we don't think as deliberately as that. We think about being authentic. At the end of the day, the authenticity of the creators we work with, the athletes we work with, the stories that we tell, that is the meter in which we operate. And so do we feel like we're representing the players, the athlete, the game, and the fan in a respectful and authentic way? And if we do that, it will bring both the casual fan along and the hardcore fan along.
And I'll throw in, when I was giving the example of Brianna Brianna Stewart versus Brianna and saying Stephen Curry versus Stephen Curry, that was for the broadcasters, the professionals in the room. I do hold them to that standard and accountability. These are top 5 players in the world. This is not hard. For the fans, come. Well, I'm so happy you're here. Consume it how you want. You know, and for me, what I have control over is the lens in which I'm telling these stories. Since I've been a player and since I started as a broadcaster, players have always been very important to me, and telling their stories. Culture has always been very important to me, accuracy, and then the game itself. You know, like there's different vehicles. It's really interesting in listening to you two because you serve different parts of the ecosystem and the consumption.
But it's the same ecosystem.
Exactly. And whether we like it or not, right? Like this was not like our ecosystem was not necessarily created with women and women's sports in mind. We cannot change that, so we must evolve it. And that's why, from my vantage point, right, we have to make experts out of our experts. That's a huge responsibility that I take very, very seriously. And also, I sit inside the institution. I have to be a bridge builder. If I say this in quite literally like the most positive way possible, Caitlin's a gateway drug for some people to women's sports, right? If that brought you in, I'm gonna keep you here. And I am not going to nobody wants the finger wagged at them, especially if you've been in sports for 20 plus years and you've worked at ESPN and you've built other parts of our business. It's my job to build the bridge to get you to understand why this is the best business opportunity. And I'm not gonna make you feel silly if you don't get it or you still think, oh, so is that rating because of the Caitlin Clark effect? Well, she's been out of college basketball for a long time, right? I'm gonna tell you why it is more than that. And that's okay if you've come by way of her. Now I'm going to tell you why it's necessary for you to stay here.
Outstanding soundbite on the gateway drug.
I actually think that
I gotta
that's
check
still
my PR people first on that one.
ratings. Even though Caitlin Clark was injured for most of the last WNBA season, there was a lot of positive ratings and attendance records that still happened even without her. So I think just the entire ecosystem of women's basketball is rising.
Roz, to tell you, Caitlin didn't play from early July on. Yeah. Most watched on our networks, most watched WNBA regular season, most watched WNBA playoffs, right? So I am, of course, I think every single one of us can say what Caitlin has done for our business.
Huge.
Incomparable. However, people are coming because the product is excellent and they are not leaving. And that is even without one singular player.
And I think it will only, think about the pipeline that this moment is creating for young women and girls. There's finally a see it, be it, and the level of play, the level of athletes across lots of sports is only going to get more and more exciting.
By the way, Roz, when you mentioned the Stephen Curry example, Nike executives also fumbled that one.
Shame.
You know, not just broadcasters. Let's end this way. When we look at the next few years, and we've talked about pressure, we've talked about the floor has risen now, which I think is an outstanding analogy to think about where things are. When you look at the next 3 to 5 years, what needs to happen or keep happening to keep climbing and growing and kind of keep the momentum, especially because, if we all agree there was a boom in the last maybe 2 or 3 years. I remember when the WNBA played in the bubble during the COVID, the wubble, that it sort of felt like that was the tipping point. And then arguably, and it was a major moment, but then arguably nope, the next one, that was really the tipping point. So I think there is sort of a hope that you don't lose the momentum right across the board. So I'd pose that to each of you.
Look, I come from an operator background. I think execution and infrastructure are going to be incredibly important over the next decade. And there's a lot of brands coming into the ecosystem, a lot of money pouring into the ecosystem, and we need to execute against that investment in an impeccable fashion and in a creative fashion that honors the fan that is there and looks at this fan differently than how the sports ecosystem has historically.
I feel really, really proud of what we're doing right now, and all of that's been done with intention, right? We now have created a true flag in the ground franchise. That is because we want to make it more accessible. That is because we want to be as flexible as the marketplace demands. It's not going anywhere, it's just growing. And I think growth is good, scale is better. I want to get to scale across a number of properties, and that's, I think, directionally where we're going.
Yeah, and I as someone who covers it and also consumes it, this is the first time where I'm really seeing everyone's doing their part. Like you creating Women's Sports Sundays or everything that Together is doing. Like the infrastructure is there, the belief is there. I feel like the road is up. For many of the years coming up, I felt like everything was a fight. I remember being in meetings with other broadcasters, with the higher up execs at X Network, fighting for a pregame show, fighting for a postgame show, talking about not being put on premiere times. And right now, like the infrastructure is being invested into. And that's so important, and what you guys are doing is so important because the players are bringing it, the fans are hungry, but like the fact that from the big levels it's happening, I feel like we're on the way.
And like I'm just gonna I know we're over, but I'm gonna use this as an opportunity. Pat Lowry, if Pat's here, if Carol Stiff, right, Donna, this is only possible because of the foundation that they have laid for us. I am highly aware, and I got to spend time with her in the truck last night, and I'm like, looking at her, I'm like, I hope we are making you proud. I hope we are carrying on this legacy that you created. None of this, they had to fight in rooms, like we still gotta fight. They fought in rooms when people laughed them out of it. And now we are standing around, we are at that table, and they are looking to us to help them guide the path forward for our business. So we couldn't do it without you. We appreciate you.
And as long as we're doing shout-outs, I want to shout out the players. I know we're here, the scene set is Athletes Unlimited. I'll shout out the players specifically of Athletes Unlimited who came here 5 years ago. They're, shout out AU Pro Sports, recognizing the need, recognizing that these players needed a home in the US, they needed money. They believed in themselves before a lot of these brands and companies did. It's been an uphill battle for years. AU Pro Sports is athlete-led. There's an executive committee too, and that's also with the Unrivaled League, same kind of vibes. Like these women have been fighting for years, have been at the forefront of social change, justice change, basketball change, and
I think athlete-led is a key point too.
Yeah,
just to carry on to
better.
that. Like if
You're not
you,
getting us off the stage.
it's like Unrivaled and Together, and like it's the women that are making this happen.
Shout out to the players, shout out to the women doing the work.
Nancy said you're going to have a hard time reining us in, but this has been terrific. I mean, we could talk for another 30 minutes. John Patrickhoff, in an interview we did a couple weeks ago, said the same about how the conversations with networks and TV execs have completely changed since 5 years ago. And I just think the media momentum is clear. Can we give these three a round of applause? Great stuff. Excellent.